It's the Underdogs back with you for another special college football episode. I'm Jordan Brenner. That's Peter Keating. And Peter, I don't even know what we're going to talk about. It's not like anything important happened this weekend in college football.
Every week I'm thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to like where college football is going to end up in a few years, but the road to getting there is sure proving interesting, isn't it?
What are you talking about? There weren't any momentous underdogs doing
How many?
anything of import.
I know we're not supposed to believe in selective endpoints, but let's go to the top 11, okay? Of the top 11 teams, 4 of them lost to unranked teams last week.
Anchor down, Peter. Anchor down. Vanderbilt. It happened.
There's
It
goalposts.
happened.
There's goalposts coming at me. It's
Dude,
crazy.
It may go another 100 years at Vanderbilt with anything like that happening. What a cool moment for that school, for that team. What a weird moment for the state because Vandy wins, but Tennessee loses to Arkansas. So stuff's happening.
I mean, not only is it a great game, the Alabama, I want to say Alabama loss. Isn't that terrible? We should call it just the Vanderbilt win. But Alabama had a 56% success rate on its plays. Alabama gained 8.8 yards of play in that game. Vanderbilt gained 5.6. Alabama had gains of 20 or more yards on 11% of their snaps. They scored touchdowns every time Alabama was in the red zone. They scored a touchdown. They were a 22.5-point favorite. I'm still not sure actually how they lost. It's wild. It's crazy.
Well, it's college football, and we got to look forward. So, do you think there's more of this upheaval coming as we head into the meat of the schedule?
Yes, because good teams have to play each other, because good teams are herded into these super conferences now, so they actually have to meet in a way that is much more intense than past years, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, sure,
everyone
but that doesn't speak to the unranked teams beating the.
That's true. That's true. But everyone in the SEC has at least one loss, and almost all of them still have to play each other. So maybe they're getting banged up against each other and maybe there's just more parity. That's a good point. Unranked stuff. I mean, they're just going to lose. Top teams are losing more games though, one way or another.
Well, here's what's interesting, though, to me, is that favorites, you'd think the numbers would be really bad for favorites, but especially among top 5 teams. But top 5 teams this year, when they've been a favorite of 3 touchdowns or fewer, so like not when they're playing middle Tennessee, Tech State, Eastern, A&M, they so minus 21 or less, they're 5-2 covering those against, and you've got some current teams that fall into that mix this week. You've got Penn State favored by 5.5 against USC. You've got you got Texas favored by 14.5 against Oklahoma. And then you've got the big one, Ohio State favored by 3.5 at Oregon. I think I saw that this is the first time since 2008 Oregon's been a home underdog. So why don't we start there? That hook is sort of sitting out there wanting you to take Oregon, getting the 3.5, right?
Yeah, it is. Just at the moment, I'm wondering whether Ohio State's a little underappreciated. Gotten a lot of publicity, a lot of celebrity for teams ranging from Texas to Georgia to Colorado. This is a big moment for Ohio State, don't you think? I mean, I think analytics say they're right up there as one of the top 2 teams in the country, 2 or 3 anyway. And maybe this is the big moment.
Right. Well, you've got these big matchups between 2 top 10, top 15 teams, right? You've got that game. You've got the Ole Miss LSU game that's 9 against 13, and then the Red River rivalry. You've got Texas at number 1 going to play Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl, who's up to 18th in the rankings and 4-1. Is somehow that's an SEC game now. But Peter,
that's wild.
I'm looking, if we're following suit now for these teams in the top 5, top 10 losing to unranked teams. Here's what you're looking. You got Alabama. Could it happen again against South Carolina? You got Clemson going to Wake Forest. You've got Penn State, we mentioned, going to USC. Maybe you like Georgia getting knocked off again against Mississippi State, or Tennessee is hosting Florida. So, God, any of those stand out as our next Vanderbilt, our next Northern Illinois, someone who's going to go in and knock off a top team from outside of the top 25.
I would have said South Carolina against Alabama before last week because we had a lot of reasons to like South Carolina, right? And it's a good example of maybe teams in these super conferences having to play unexpectedly difficult games. But I don't think there's any way Alabama will be looking past this or not playing in peak form. So I think my favorite of everybody you just mentioned is Wake Forest, but what do you think?
Uh, as question
As an
as
upset candidate?
questionable as I think they are, and the spread's not huge. Maybe USC beating Penn State.
Oh wow.
Going all the way to LA, it's a 12:30 start there. I think that's a tough test. Again, if I had to pick one of those, same reason I don't think Tennessee is going to slip up against Florida. They've they're coming off a loss. Their attention is there. I'm wondering, though, if again, thinking out loud here, if we've talked about trap games a lot in the past, right? I think part of what prevented some of them in the past was the knowledge that you had to be perfect pretty much to make the college
Yes.
football playoff. Now, is it possible a team might be able to might sleepwalk through a matchup a little more now, knowing that they have margin for error? That Alabama loses one game, they're fine, they can still make the playoffs. Do you think it may be harder for teams to get top teams' attention every week compared to the in the previous 4-team playoff system?
Well, what's fascinating is that you've already seen some of the very best teams in the country lose, and therefore are going to have to deal with that. So, no, I mean, I don't know if it's going to affect the schedule so much, but it's definitely going to affect the tiering, right? Like right now, we all agree that Alabama and Georgia are still up there with Texas and Ohio State. What do you need to do to crack that top tier in the top 12, right? Can you do it with 2 losses? It's really interesting. Like the Ole Miss game is a really fascinating test case for me this week because their stats, and if you just look at them, what you call the eye test, they just demolish people, right? But how do you adjust that for the schedule they face? They haven't faced those extraordinary, they haven't faced a whole gauntlet of top 10 teams yet. So it's going to be really interesting to see who cracks that top tier of the top 12, according to what you just laid out.
The other interesting thing we're going to have to take a look at, and maybe we'll wait one more week though, is our group of those 7 underdog teams we like, teams that were unranked in the preseason, but we thought had a chance to make the playoff. Man, they've had a rough couple weeks. Louisville's lost 2 games in a row. They're falling back. We know Nebraska was peaking and they lost. TCU is only 3-3. The SEC teams, none of them has really emerged. So Peter, it may be time to take a look at a fresh pack of those teams. Maybe give it one more week, but then you've got teams like Pittsburgh that is 5-0. You've got a BYU team that's 5-0. God, Colorado 4-1. So
Well,
I'm
look, right. I mean, look,
yeah.
there's 3 things to revisit. One is that group of 7, right? They've had their ups and downs, more downs than ups last week. 2 is I'm still really interested in the unranked teams that signed excellent quarterbacks, top level recruits from other programs and are riding them. Pittsburgh's an example of that. Syracuse is an example of that. Those are interesting. And then Jordan, we should circle back just a little bit. Last week we talked about Heisman candidates. We both loved Genti, right, from Boise State. Do you see?
I think I was on the Genti and Travis Hunter bandwagons.
Genti, Travis Hunter. We both sang Travis Hunter's praises, and also Cam Ward, right? And we also said that Jalen Milroe had those plus 200 odds because of what Alabama had done the week before. Well, look what happens. Alabama loses that crazy game this week. Jalen Milroe plus 1,000. That's how much he's dropped. Genti, now the front runner at plus 225. So I hope you guys out there locked him in at plus 1,000 or even earlier when he was plus 2,000 earlier in the year. Travis Hunter, now the runner-up at plus 300. So the whole country's on to Genti and Hunter and Cam Ward now, the top 3 guys in the Heisman race.
Right. Well, like you said, I think the logic behind it was the key, right? That it's easier to bank on someone whose case is going to be made purely by individual performance than someone who needs team success to couple with that performance, right? So yes, Genti and Hunter now at this point are largely making the case on their own, irrespective of what their teams do. It'll help. We talked about if Boise State gets into the playoff, I think it almost and Genti keeps up this level of performance, it may be a layup at that point. If Travis Hunter can carry Colorado into the playoff, that gives them a narrative and momentum, etc. But both of those guys can make a case even if they're slightly around 500 at the end of the year, whereas a Milroe, a Cam Ward, or whomever can't do that with 1 or 2 losses even.
Right. So the questions remain, can Hunter play this many snaps at this high level for a full season? If he can, name the award after him. I mean, and Genti, every time you turn on your TV, this is literally what happened to me. I found the Boise State game in the nether reaches of cable, and he ripped off a 63-yard touchdown. I mean, anytime you put your TV on, it can happen while he's in the game. It's amazing.
Well, I think that Colorado-Kansas State game, who's one of only 2 ranked teams currently on Colorado's schedule remaining, is going to be a tasty late night
It's a good showcase
snack, right? At 10:15 after a great, maybe the Oregon State game is against Ohio State is just wrapped up, and then I think people are gonna tune in to see what Colorado's got. So it's a great chance for him to make sort of a lasting impression on the voters.
I'll say this once again, right? Between Colorado and Boise State this year, we're not missing those Pac-12 late night games so much.
Fair enough. I mean, look, there's nothing like Pac-12 after dark. So it's just sad, the darkness that the eternal darkness that that conference has assumed. But
yeah.
But no, I'm with you, and I also, it's like I don't have a feel for who's going to win this whole thing. I don't have a feel for how the playoffs going to set up, and it's from an underdog perspective, it's pretty damn cool.
Can I ask you one quick question? From all this chaos, is there a team we thought it would be hard to predict who was going to benefit from all this conference realignment, new travel schedules, complete chaos? Has any team emerged that impresses you with how they've dealt with the chaos? Because I'm looking at Washington, all new coaches, all new players, crazy schedule. And you know what, Jordan? They are 4-2. They're going to play at Iowa. Iowa just got wiped out, scored 7 points against Ohio State last week. Teams favored at home after scoring fewer than 10 points, struggle to cover the spread. That describes Iowa. Washington's an underdog. The coach has done a great job. Will Rogers has done a great job, leads the country in pass completions. I think I like Washington as an underdog against Iowa this week, and I think I like the rebuild in general.
I think that's a great call. I think they deserve a ton of credit. You nailed all the reasons. You lose your whole staff. You lose most of your players. That usually takes a year or two at least to sort of remake. Now, the transfer portal works both ways, and it's easier to replace lost talent that way too. But still, that's a whole lot of chaos, a whole lot of turnover, and they're making that work. So good on them. And Peter, before we go, I want to give you a little credit too, because we're not going to do an official nailed it this week, but Peter Keating weatherman, like, God, I've never seen a confluence of events quite like last week's Rutgers Nebraska under, between the wind and the 2 defenses, and you nailed that under with room to spare.
I couldn't have been happy. It's probably the happiest betting recommendation I've ever made when afterwards Greg Schiano at Rutgers actually said it was hot out there and the wind was strong. And it was 14-7, and we hit the under. It was meteorological, it was defensive, and it was Nebraska. And also, of course, a New Jersey school in a Big Ten game was all you could want an under to be.
Well, I'm just glad that the strong wind for once had nothing to do with what was coming out of your mouth, and that instead it hopefully made people some money.
The hot air helped people for once. It was for
exactly.
good, not evil. Yes.
All right. Well, until then, enjoy what should be shaping up to be an amazing week in college football. And we'll
shipping up. It's going to be awesome.
Shipping up. I can't speak English.
We're shipping out, but it's going to be excellent.
All right. And we'll be back to maybe talk about more chaos next week.